Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, wrapped still in a pandemic that's created all kinds of disruption for so many of us. And we're going to discuss today ways to thrive online. These sessions I've been doing for the Earth Institute at Columbia University. On Wednesdays, typically look at policy questions. On Fridays, we look at the media. On Sundays, we examine the arts and we sing and there's poetry. Mondays are about thriving online. How do we make the most of this enforced or voluntary effort to build community, to network, to create action networks, particularly? That's the focus today. That can make a difference, that can turn goals that seem so abstract sometimes into actual outcomes on the ground where it matters. And I'm just thrilled today to have a collection of young women who are pursuing progress, both on the ground and virtually in amazing ways. There's, let's see, from top to bottom here, depending if you see the screen the same as I do, Pooja Iyengar, who was on this program very early in the pandemic spread in April, when I learned through her sister, who's here at affiliated with Columbia, that she had developed a network to get food efficiently to poor families in Bhopal, India, when the lockdown there was spreading. People there couldn't even get to the well to get water, to get food. A lot of livelihoods were disrupted. The lowest wage workers couldn't do their work, and there was a threat of starvation. So Pooja Iyengar, it's great to have you here again. And next in line here is Kazana Siwaya, who's in Lusaka, Zambia, and in medical school in China, where she was before the pandemic struck. And she had to come back to Lusaka to when that happened, but she's still studying long distance, which is in itself a remarkable thing. But she's building an organization called Nutrition 2030, clearly aimed around the Sustainable Development Goal #2, ending hunger. And, it's a tough path to 2030. It was tough already before the pandemic, and now that has created much more food insecurity. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. And really excited to meet Shia Bastida, who is in high school still. Yes, high school? Where are you? Are you?
I'm a freshman
You're a freshman in college. Where are you going?
I'm going to
Oh,
UPenn.
fantastic. What a great school. So Shia is one of the first early activists, youth climate activists. She's born in Mexico, has indigenous roots there, just did a fantastic TED Talk, basically built around a letter to your grandmother, which I might show a little bit of in a minute. And you were a Fridays for Future pioneer with Greta and others very early on. I'll bet you were at the march, that one at the UN that I got to visit right after she got off the boat, when Greta did her first US action. And it's great to know young people like you taking on the ultimate challenge, really, of climate, building a sustainable human relationship with the climate system. So it's great to have you here. And I want to just sort of start by saying the goal here is both to learn a little bit about where you're headed in the world, what drives your concerns, but also how you do it, how you work to build the networks you need. I noticed in your TED Talk, Shia, you mentioned that New York is sort of a natural hub, like a network node for action. But now the virtual world means that extends everywhere, and everywhere where there's connectivity. And I've talked about that on this show before, that we don't live on an even information landscape. So let me close this and go to just your faces. And let's start in here a little bit. Let's start with Shia. As I mentioned, you have roots in Mexico. You are very engaged in the climate challenge. You're very young, and you use tools that to me are still foreign. I've been writing about climate change since the 1980s, and it started out, in magazines, paper, like this. This is a 1988 story I wrote on global warming, but that's very antiquated. You had to buy the magazine, you had to know about it, And now we have this great landscape of ways to connect. So Shia, could you just describe what your particular goal is on the climate question, and then how you use connectivity to pursue it?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for the platform. I'm so happy to share this space with all of you. And, one of the main goals of not only myself, but youth, I think, in the climate space is to increase our awareness of kind of how everything interconnects, how one thing affects the other, and how we really need to be aware of not just one social issue, but really how one affects the other. And for me, the climate crisis exacerbates all social issues, from racial issues to food security to immigration. And I've seen many of those, in my life. And I think that's the goal of the youth climate movement, to say the climate crisis is affecting people all over the world disproportionately. And it is our role as humans to be aware of these interconnections and to highlight them, and to say addressing the climate crisis is actually an opportunity to address many more things and to ground ourselves in many more solutions. And I think that online platforms are a great way not only to listen to more people, but have solutions reach larger audiences.
One thing about your journey that I enjoyed learning about in this TED Talk was how there's a lineage. Your grandmother, like my grandfather, by the way, said the exact same thing to me when I was a kid. When you leave a room, leave it better than it was when you got there. Not just to make it okay, but make it a little better than it was. Like clean something up, maybe even if someone else spilled it. And I love that wisdom from your grandmother is transferring to you as well through your father and presumably onward. So that's another element. Let's check in with. Let me just change the layout here again. So Kazana in Lusaka, Zambia. First of all, how are you doing, and what's the general situation there with the pandemic? I was just talking with Joseph Pupe a couple of days ago, and who's there also. He's a frequent guest on our music show. So how are things generally? And then I want to get a sense of your journey too. How did you choose medicine, and why nutrition is a focus now?
Okay, so right now during the COVID pandemic, things are not so good, but people are taking precautions, mask wearing, keeping social distance, and avoiding crowded places. So far, not that bad, not that bad. So why I chose medicine, it's been a passion. I wouldn't see myself doing anything else apart from medicine. And how I came up with the nutrition project is I had interned at Children's Hospital 2 years ago. And I realized that a lot of conditions that I saw, such as malnutrition and stunting, these are diseases that could be preventable. So after the internship program, I got lucky and I was accepted at a program called the Study of the U.S. Institutes for Women Leaders here in the United States. So after I took that program, I decided that I wanted to venture into nutrition. That's how I built the project from that program in the United States.
And what's the goal? How do you plan to pursue better nutrition for kids? And that issue of stunting is so important because it translates to lifelong gap. It's like everything is slower. Kids it's like when you've been hit by an early disaster in your life, that shadow is there for a long time. Nutrition is even more so like that.
Yes. So looking at Zambia's population, we have about 16.6 million people, and 35% of children are stunted. And this is a problem because most of these children come from low-income communities. So our goal is to help prevent malnutrition and stunting, starting from maternal health and child health. So it actually focuses more on the helping women, forming nutrition support groups. We also have a curriculum workbook called the Nutrition Workbook, which helps them practicing cooking demos and just how to practice a good, healthy lifestyle.
And is it restricted to Lusaka, or is this across Zambia?
When the project started, it was strictly Lusaka, but now we have branched out to other different provinces. So far we are in 3 other provinces. So our goal is to reach 10 provinces of Zambia. So right now we're in 3 provinces. So we have educated about 300 women in the local community.
And here's where I get into the new technologies, or at least the ones that I still don't fully integrate into my day. Is WhatsApp important? Like, mobile phones now are so ubiquitous. And I know, for example, in parts of Africa, farmers get their crop prices and disaster risk issues are conveyed to communities through WhatsApp routinely in ways that are not normal here in these states yet. So when you think of that menu of things that you check when you're checking on your program, or when you have to get a message out and around, what is the tool?
So far we've been using Facebook. Facebook is a very good platform, and Instagram, and we use the workbook, like I said. So the workbook comes in different languages so that it's easy to translate to people that can't read English. So it has pictures in it, so that if they can't read or they can't write, at least they can see the pictures and know what's going on. And so yeah.
That's
so
great.
that explains more.
That's such an important. You've mentioned 2 things that are important. One is literacy. You can't always assume that the people who need information can read. And the other is, again, the distribution of information. Is radio also used much?
Yes, yes, radio, TV, and Facebook.
That's fantastic. I'll show the Facebook page in a few minutes.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask each of you in a minute also how the lockdown has changed your strategy. But Puja, let's get some focus on Bhopal, which for those of my generation, we knew it best as this came out back in April for the disastrous environmental tragedy there when a Union Carbide facility leaked a deadly gas and killed several thousand people, I believe. And talk about having a lingering effect. That just lingered and lingered for so long. But now, of course, you have the pandemic. And I know you've shifted since the food distribution work you were doing in the early days there to focusing much more on women and work and jobs. So just give a little picture of how things are going.
So I run an organization, an all-women's non-profit. It's called Mahashakti Seva Kendra. And we have been working with the survivors of the gas tragedy. And our main focus before the pandemic was livelihood, as well as an eco mission. We always try to make eco-friendly products for the environment and connect it to livelihood. So that's what was happening before pandemic, and we were on a mission to remove single-use plastic from our city. So we used to collect clothes from old clothes from the entire city, and we used to make them into cloth bags and distribute it so that the single-use plastic could be removed. And that's how the livelihood mission was going on. And then the pandemic struck, and most of the women who were working with me, their husbands were daily wagers. And in India, 90% of the workforce, like around 490 million people, are daily wagers. So all their jobs were gone and they were sitting at home. So it directly impacted me and the ladies. And that was the time, it was an emergency situation during COVID. And then we decided that food was the most important thing. People were not earning and there was no food. So then we organized ourselves, and the government also, they were not prepared for a lockdown. So there were no community kitchens in the beginning. So a lot of people's collectives and citizen volunteers all gathered together, and we also formed a group, and we started giving out food to the people in the community and the slum areas. And we basically formed a chain where there were volunteers in the slum areas. They used to tell us how much food is required. we used to contact the community kitchens, because those people, the population is so much that the entire lot cannot go to a community kitchen, and because of the pandemic it's a difficult situation. So then we used to take food from the community kitchens, and then we used to give them take them back to the community and distribute. And it was cooked food, and it was hot, it was summer, and we had to see that the food should not get spoiled. So this entire chain had to be managed. And I would say that since we were talking about WhatsApp and Facebook, WhatsApp was our lifeline. In India we cannot function without WhatsApp, and everybody has it. So
Yeah.
it was a boon for us, like how WhatsApp helped and how the messages were sent, and everything happened through that.
And
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the work that now we were talking about masks, and there's a little bit of a shift toward.
Yeah. So now, since the emergency of the food is reduced, the lockdown is over, and people are slowly going back to work, there is a problem with livelihood, because there are still the daily wages are not going to work, and we have our workforce increased from 30. We are around now 80 ladies, because the schools haven't opened. There are teachers from schools who are not getting their salary, so everybody is working with us. And we are trying now to cut down single-use masks and gloves and caps, and trying to make, we have already made nearly 2 lakh mask and caps, and distributed to the entire community in Bhopal. And our main aim is that people should stop using single-use mask, and they should shift to cotton reusable mask and gloves and caps. And we are even making doctors' PPE kits, which can be sanitized and reused. So that is how we are progressing. And we had to innovate, because and we started making essential items, because if we continued with what we were making, there's people are not buying. So we, to increase the livelihood, we connected it to something, kind of an eco mission, and then shifted to making cotton masks, cotton gloves, caps. And everybody is taking it from us now, like the entire city is buying from us.
That's so interesting. One thing that's interesting from what I remember in our April conversation is that city government there is pretty integrated with NGOs, with nonprofits. In other words, I think if I remember correctly,
Yes. Yeah.
there's cooperation, collaboration. Sometimes here there's more of a conflict between nonprofits and cities. Is that unusual, or is that normal in India?
In Bhopal, I would say that the city government really, the administration really cooperated with us, and we were holding each other's hands during the pandemic, because they had the community kitchens, but they didn't have the volunteers. So we were the volunteers who were helping out and giving out the food, and especially during the mass exodus of the migrants. Nearly 10 million migrants were moving from the city to their villages. So every day there were buses passing through our area, and we were giving out food, water bottles, milk packets to the children. And the city government really supported us. And because of the administration, this collaboration could have been formed between the collective. All of us came together only because before the pandemic, we were working with our administration in removing single-use plastic. So our goal was the same. And then from plastic, we shifted to helping out the COVID people during the pandemic.
So I want to shift back to the climate campaign and to Shia, who she's going to have to leave us a little early because she has to get back to class. You don't have to declare a major yet, do you, in freshman year?
I mean, my intended major is environmental studies with a concentration in policy and international relations. So,
that doesn't surprise me. That's great. And so I just what's the class you have to dive into too?
I'm taking a class in sustainable development and
fantastic.
culture in Latin America.
And could you talk about a little bit about your background with that, with the roots going back into the indigenous cultures in Mexico?
Yeah, for sure. So my dad, he's part of the Otomi Toltec indigenous community. And, you know, in Mexico, there's there's kind of this animosity to people declaring that they're Indigenous or self-reporting as Indigenous, because in a lot of ways it was seen as, if you don't speak Spanish, if you're still speaking your Indigenous language, you're not advancing with society, you're not developing. But what Indigenous people have come to find and realize is that Indigenous philosophy, reciprocity with Mother Nature, taking care of what gives us life, that kind of thinking that we are not really embodying right now is the solution to a lot of our problems, because we have come to commodify Mother Nature as a resource, which should not be the case, right? We should not be profiting off of exploitation and of pollution. So now my dad actually is the first one in his generation of brothers in his family to relearn Indigenous language and to reconnect with Indigenous roots. And that the journey that he went through when he was my age and older was taught to me as I was growing up. So in my view, everybody in the world had the same love for Mother Nature, the same sense of the need for reciprocity, the same goal of, fulfilling our purpose that would also help keep Mother Nature in equilibrium. So it's really philosophical, and I grew up like this. And when I saw that humans were actually in my own neighborhood, factories were polluting our rivers. The river that my dad used to bathe in is really, really polluted, and it smells so bad you can't even drive by it without putting the window up. It's a completely different landscape. And for Indigenous communities, when you switch the ecosystem, you disrupt the biocultural connection and you disrupt people's livelihoods. So that's how I see the Indigenous philosophy coming into my line of work, and why I think it's so important to put it out there that the brunt of the climate crisis is not only wildfires and floods, it actually comes much before. It comes when the fossil fuel industry displaces Indigenous communities. It comes when the fossil fuel industry pollutes Indigenous waterways, and disrupts land sovereignty. So it is my goal through the youth movement and in the youth movement to push this narrative forward of the need to respect not only Indigenous communities, but all communities of color and our own humanity. That's an amazing way to get the full dimensionality of these things. For someone so young, you've really nailed it. There are systemic aspects to the situations we're in right now. And they also are part of the problem there is that the structural realities like fossil fuel still running 80% of our infrastructure, even now globally, makes it a long path ahead. And I know young people, particularly remembering my youth, and I still am young at heart. We all have this urgency factor, but there's also like urgency plus patience or stick-to-itiveness. You all seem to have grasped that this is a long journey ahead, and that at a young age too. Maybe each of you could comment on what you do to sustain the urgency when you know it's complex. And maybe Shia, maybe you could respond first, just again because of your time constraints. Yeah, of course. So, a lot of youth do get into this work, and a lot of people in general. I don't think it's only youth, because we see the future as an abstract thing of how much effort we put into the present. Right. So, the other, my previous vacation, I went to Florida because it was my friend's birthday there. And I was reading Uninhabitable Earth on the beach, which is not a good idea. And I was reading about... Wait. You were reading Uninhabitable Earth, David Wallace Wells' book on the beach in Florida? Yes. Not a good idea. So I was just starting the book, and the part where it says we are headed to 7 degrees of warming. So that made me realize, first of all, that it was really sad that my children might never be able to see a beach because they take thousands of years to form and only a few years to be underwater in our current path. But it also made me realize that there is a difference between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees of warming. So even if we don't meet our climate goals in terms of, limiting our heat to the IPCC recommended, which is 1.5 to 2 degrees, there is still a lot of work to do to make sure that we don't get to those 7 degrees. Right. So I'm not doing this because I'm sad. Maybe sometimes I do get a little, climate grief, but I'm doing this because I'm optimistic about our power to change our course, because I'm optimistic about our ability to come together. I'm optimistic about humans' innovation and our ability to use globalization in a positive way, not only in the spread of, like extractivism and things like that. So yeah, I think that's how I keep myself grounded, always returning to my indigenous roots for that, and really trying to bring cooperation and intergenerational cooperation forward.
That's just fantastic. Well, I wish you well. Hang in there for a few more minutes if you can. I think there's some questions that'll come in via the chat. So back to Zambia, and one thing that Shia mentioned, and well, you all mentioned, not so much in India, but the reality in India is that you have dozens of languages. And we heard that in Zambia too, and as we know throughout the tropics, in whether it's Africa or South America or Asia, there's that dizzying array of communities, and not just languages, not just words, but worldviews. So that makes it really hard, even if you have some connectivity through WhatsApp or some other means, to be sure there's full two-way engagement. So I guess there I'd ask Khazana to articulate how women, what's the pull, what's the mechanism to make sure women who, in the middle of their busy work, anyone who's got nutrition deprived kids is scrambling just to get through the day. And so what's the best way for that connection to be made? It feels sometimes like it's not so much a message that's needed, but a connection.
So currently, in Zambia, there's what we call Child Health Week. This is a week where a nutritionist talks to expecting mothers and parents on what's best for their kids, what food they're supposed to eat or what they're not supposed to do. And so we partner with local nutritionists in these local clinics. So during those nutritional workshops, it's easier for us to engage with the parents. So aside from that, we saw most people would just come to hear what's going on. They're coming for the nutritional workshop. So what we decided to do is we created something called cooking demos. So during cooking demos, we we buy food from farmers and local markets, and then we prepare the food in front of the parents and in front of the expecting mothers so that they can see how it's done. They can see how we can use food from like cheap food, because most of the parents had questions to say, you're teaching us about nutrition, are you going to give us the money? How do you expect us to survive? This is what we can afford to feed our kids. So we came up with cooking demos, and these cooking demos are like we use food from local markets, so it's easier for these parents and mothers to access the food. So the cooking demo and the nutritional workshops have really helped us engage with these mothers more than social media has.
Yeah, and Puja, I assume in India, I know most of your work is in the city, but I know there's lots of nutrition questions and livelihood questions in the countryside too. I want to show you one of the most exciting things that I saw when I was in India a couple of years ago writing about cooking pollution was that there's this network of more than 1 million women from villages across India who are trained, given a little bit of training. They have cell phones, and their job is, they're called ASHA, they're accredited social health activists. And it struck me as such a powerful connector. Again, it's a way at the village level to have a trusted person, a woman from that area, who's keeping track of like who's pregnant or who might, need nutritional advice or family planning or the like. And it's connected to the bigger medical health establishment. I assume, Kazana, that there are initiatives like this in parts of Africa as well. But again, it's about relationship building and trust, not just about messaging, putting out a good tweet. Is that something that you're familiar with? Maybe you could talk about it a little bit.
This happens not only in the rural areas, but in the urban slums also. There are ASHA workers in the area where we work, in the community. So she is this trusted lady, and all the health issues that the ladies are a little, they're introvert, they don't want to speak out to their family members. Then ASHA worker is somebody who, they tell their problems to, and she has a little bit of knowledge, and obviously she's connected to the bigger doctors and the other medical facility which the government gives, and then the aid is given to them. So I think this is an amazing concept, and it is going really well in rural and in the urban slum communities also. And
That's
only
fantastic.
because there is a trust built around the lady, and how that one lady is connected to so many in the community. Yeah.
Right. It's sort of a sensory apparatus. It's a way to have that active view of things. Kazana, is there much of that involved in the nutrition work around Zambia? That kind of direct connectivity? Ambassadors and the like?
Oh yes. For our project, we partner with college students and university students who serve as nutrition ambassadors. So their ambassadors, they go out in the communities and in the local clinics. So they build that friendship and that trust during nutritional workshops. So we have connections with nutritionists and workers from the hospitals and those in the rural areas. So it's easier to speak to the parents or to the expecting mothers when they come for our nutrition workshops.
That's fantastic. I'm going to show you your Facebook page in a second. And I wanted to ask, before I open that, I wanted to ask Shia about ReEarth Initiative. And specifically, what are some of the projects that you work on through that?
So ReEarth Initiative was actually born out of COVID. So because of our inability to meet in person, to strike in person, we felt like we still needed a community. And for me, I really wanted to foster a global community because I was, really in touch with organizers in New York City, and I wanted to create something that had global reach. And ReEarth Initiative was that. So it started off as a campaign for Earth Day because we were supposed to have a global climate strike on Earth Day, and we wanted to find an alternative for people to feel like they could still celebrate. So we got a reach of 300,000 people for Earth Day through a ReEarth Initiative. And we got people to pledge to do individual and systemic actions because, there's this huge discussion of what's more important, individual or systemic actions. And obviously both are important. So we wanted people to pledge to do both. And the team was so amazing. We have people from Singapore where striking is illegal. So they were never really part of Fridays for Future. So that's why our platform like this is very important. We had people from Chile and Costa Rica, India, Ireland, Australia, really all over the world, because I also wanted to show the world that the climate movement is not only European and US led. There's actually climate activists from all over the world who want platforms. And what we did with ReEarth Initiative, what we're doing now is create very accessible tools for people to know about a particular issue and know what the solutions to those issues are. We have over 200 volunteers who help us translate material as well. So we have our toolkits translated to up to 6 different languages because, as we were talking about, a big part of accessibility is language, because a lot of climate information is only in English. And now our most recent project was that we were working on the Escazú Agreement. So for those who don't know, the Escazú Agreement is something that would give countries in Latin America and the Caribbean the right to have information about the environment. It would connect climate action and human rights, which is one of the most important things for Latin America. And yeah, it's just an amazing treaty. And a few days ago, Argentina ratified it. So we're just waiting for one more country to ratify it for it to go into force.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just a global platform to highlight different things.
Fantastic. Hold on, let me go back to the general view. And Puja, for you, what's on the wish list? Like, one thing that struck me so powerfully when we spoke in April was you're building a food network to reach thousands of people in one of India's innumerable cities, a country of more than 1 billion people. And I guess maybe it's a different aspect to the sustainability challenge, which is scale and time, like we talked about a minute ago, systemic problems, but also just scale in billions, moving from that individual action, like Shia was just describing, to some things that can spread on their own. And I think each of you also has this interest in making sure what you're doing can be replicated or can kind of take on its own life, not because it's too big for one person. So Puja, are you part of a larger network, or does Bhopal talk to Delhi or Hyderabad, or is there a larger network around the issues you're working on with like women's work and the like? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry. In terms of livelihood, we are connected to practically everybody right now, thanks to Facebook and Instagram. And we've got orders from Hong Kong now to make bags for them, and all cotton bags. And then there are orders from the US and then Belgium. So thanks to Facebook and WhatsApp, we are connected to everybody. But our main focus is green skilling. Actually, livelihood, we can achieve we can get orders for anything and everything. But our main focus is to continue our eco mission. That is where the problem lies, because we have to explain it to people. We have to talk about fair wages, which obviously manufacturers don't understand. We have to talk about using eco-friendly methods, and the whole concept and the whole campaign of who made your bag is really, really important to us. Whenever we are buying a fabric also, we make sure that we buy organic cotton, we take it from the farmers, we give them fair wages, then it comes to our ladies, and then they stitch it, and then it is given out. So the whole eco system we have to preserve, and that is the challenge for us. Creating livelihood is not an issue, but connecting it to an eco mission, that is important. And a small town like Bhopal, we are trying our best to convey our mission, and that is the bigger goal now for us. So people in Delhi and people in the US and Belgium, everybody understands. But in our own area, it is very difficult to convey it to the people. And thankfully, our ladies have become these community volunteers. And we have, through various interactions, we have explained it to them about not using single-use plastic, about landfills. So they have become so vocal that they are trying to transform their communities. And now we are also making these reusable sanitary napkins. We are trying to change the entire slum, not to use disposable napkins, but reusable ones. So we are having these campaigns in the community also. And people are changing. It's going to take time, but we are getting there with our eco mission and with livelihood. Yeah.
I would love to know if any of you have questions for any of the others before we run out of time. I don't want to hog the microphone. So there's several common elements here. Is there anything that India and Zambia and New York City and the climate youth movement need to explore together? We can work on that going forward. if they're, I'll keep you in touch with each other. There are some questions that came in, comments. Olivier Pacholak is offering a little, sobering reality check. Says corruption and nations can't work all together because they have different economic interests. I think the moral of that story is, even under the Paris Agreement, even if the U.S. stays in it, even if on the other agreements, the Convention on Biological Diversity and the SDGs themselves, there's all these back issues, the complexities, the headaches, the bad actors. How does that feel in the context of the work you're doing? Maybe just briefly, Shia, and then Kazana.
Yeah, I completely have been increasingly aware of this, especially because I am taking international relations as a class now. So I've read all the theory for the past 400 years of how nations interact with each other and how we have come from glorifying power and wars to get power through a system that has to do more about cooperation. And there's obviously a lot of complexities there, but we have to, this system, the international system, is always evolving. We're always learning new things. We're always learning from other actors. And now we see more cooperation than before. Now we see countries working together more than before. We see that the only actors are not only nation states. There's actually people who change systems, norm entrepreneurs, transnational activist networks. And all of these things have a huge impact on what goes on in negotiation rooms, have a huge impact on what policies can be, and a huge impact on what we value as progress. Because right now we value, for us as a global community, progress is infinite economic growth. And for Indigenous people, progress is reaching equilibrium, and that has its highs and its lows. So it's really about how we as humans see the world, see progress, see development. And that is always changing. And my hope is that for the sake of our future and our present and, the planet, we value different things and we see progress as a different thing than just infinite growth.
That reminds me of a show we did back in July with some folks who have developed a way for students in the United States or basically anywhere to, let me just show this, to help scour data from satellites. In this case, students in Massachusetts and Iowa helped identify illegal gold mining in Amazon rainforest, Indian reserves, the Yanomami reserve there. And part of their work ended up resulting in this Reuters article, which ended up putting more pressure on Brazil. So what you articulated just then was also the other reality of the online experience that I think is very exciting. The data, the ability to observe and the ability to impose transparency are unparalleled right now. That has its downside, right? The privacy and invasion and the other side of transparency. But it has allowed students to become changemakers, literally. So that's kind of cool. And but I wanted to ask again, Kazana and Puja, about that level of things. There's limits to what you can do on the ground. There are policy issues. Even the way the lockdown happened in India was kind of very much imposed across a nation with unbelievable diversity of situations. And I don't want to get into politics, but Modi did something very, demonstrably potent that led to all kinds of impacts. And some of that is hard sometimes.
I don't think anybody had any clue of what was happening and where we were heading. And nobody expected the migrant exodus. And people were just reacting to what was happening. Even the policymakers also, they had never suspected that such a thing would happen. And I think the government has also acknowledged that it's only because of the non-profits and the people's collectives that things were mitigated somehow. Otherwise, it could have really reached some disastrous proportions. And right now also, I don't think anybody has any clue of how to control the pandemic. And It's and India, seeing the population, this whole social distancing and mask, it just does not work. When we go out to work, there are like millions out to work. You can't control it. So yeah, blaming the government is also, I don't think it's they didn't know what had to be done, and now it's just that every individual, all collectives have to do their own effort and somehow manage to bring back livelihood. The economy is really it's in a disastrous shape, and slowly we have to come out of it. Yeah.
There's a question here from Patrick Jones, who's actually a friend of mine, a musical friend of mine from the Hudson Valley here, who has roots in the Cherokee Nation, part of his family. And he says here, is there any type of matching funding, any government support? How very inspiring you are. I think part of what he's getting at is that we tend to have an antagonistic relationship with governments sometimes. And as we heard in Bhopal, nonprofits and the city work more productively. I know Shia, a lot of the work that is being pushed by the climate community can be resisted in government, but New York City has a pretty active engagement with nonprofits. Is there a way past the idea that it's us versus them sometimes in some of these situations? And actually, Khazana, I'm not up on the politics in Zambia. So is politics your friend or your enemy, or is there a way forward there? Maybe let's hear from Khazana on that, and then Shia before you have to get back to class.
Government has been trying its best to also building the gap with preventing malnutrition. So I wouldn't say there's that friction between politics and non-profit organizations. So I would say, according to the 2019 budget, it allocates that just $1.35 is allocated to nutrition and spending on child nutrition. So looking at going forward, I think the government is doing all it can to provide at least $40 per child, that's annually. So I would say we're just supplementing, we're getting there. There's no friction between the government and non-profit organizations. We're working together, but it's just that they focus more on they focus more on what's the word? They focus more on the cure than the prevention. So that's yeah.
That's an issue. That is an issue so many places. I've written about disaster risk, not just climate change. I've written about earthquakes and preparedness for pandemics, and we seem to be stuck politically and socially with an inability to get ahead of problems. It's as if I use this phrase sometimes from 10 years ago. A reader of mine at the New York Times posted a comment that said, "Are we stuck with blah, 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 bang? Blah, 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 bang," as our way of approaching these things. And as Khazana just said, the politics is usually easier to, hey, let's go in there and fix this problem, than the politics of prevention. When you're trying to say, we can mitigate something. It hasn't happened yet, but and that's just a harder sell. And I know Shia, for sure, as a young person, part of a long line of young people who have been saying, you're messing with our climate, which is essentially what we're doing. In 2005, some young people I met in Montreal, the climate talks, said, had these T-shirts, you're screwing up our climate. And I'm wondering if it feels like a really grand challenge. It's like one of the biggest problems. It transcends climate, transcends the SDGs. It's how do we create a politics that's more proactive? And Shia, I hope that's what your thesis ends up being on. Does that feel like the core of what you think about, or how do you think about things?
I mean, in this regard, I see politics as something that changes very slowly and changes really fast at the same time. for example, like my parents were at the first Earth Summit in 1992, and back then we were saying, there's an issue that we have to deal with. And the UN in 1973 was saying, there's a lot of extractivist things that are gonna mess up our ecological balance. So it is really slow when you think about how long we've known. But then I see things that happen really fast, like the current administration rolling back almost all of our environmental legislation that we had put together for so many years. And I'm talking bad and good things happening really fast or really slow. So I think that is really important that we kind of push politics forward as to being, politics that always reminding ourselves politics are for the people. Politics are supposed to represent our best interest. And I think that everybody's best interest is at least a healthy and livable planet. But aside from that, we have to make sure that we are aware of our agency in all of the sectors that we are part of. Not only push policy, but push, institutions. What institutions you're part of, your school, the clubs you're in, places that you graduated from, where you put your money. There's so many things that we can structurally change and structurally, influence. So I think politics has to be redefined to better serve the people, but at the same time, we cannot be limited to one, pathway to change.
That's fantastically observant, and also that idea of agency for whom, the excluded, and those historically who've been excluded from these big decisions or lacks of decision, is a key part of what your movement is about, which is one of the things I appreciate so much about the young people involved in these issues. And here again is ReEarthIN.org organization if you want to find out more about what she is doing. And you're do you have to leave for class? I think it's about time.
Yes, I do.
I just want to say thank you so much. And we're going to keep on for a few more minutes with Khazana and with Puja, but thank you so much, Shia. You've brightened my day, that's for sure. And hopefully people listening can follow up. This will be, recorded and archived, and everyone can share it widely when they're not in class and the like. There's so much more to talk about going forward in the network building aspect of what you all do. So Shia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you
and good luck in your work and your studies.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe.
Same to you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. I like the generations here. And I think it's very exciting to connect folks. I have a feeling you might stay in touch after this show. So let's start to close toward the end here. And I'd love to get your last sort of steps that you think others can benefit from when you think about the work you've been doing there with food and with women's work networks in Bhopal, or Khazana, that great the way you described how you get traction on nutrition. What feels like something that can spread, or is there a method or a way when you wake up in the morning? What's the thing that you do that you feel you'd like people to know about? Maybe we'll start in Lusaka.
So currently, I think the best way to spread your message across is by networking with a lot of young people. So because the young people are the future generation, and they're in charge now. So the more we teach and go out there in the communities and attract more young people to join our organizations, we are guaranteed that there are people who are going to take up after 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So it's good to build those relationships and those networks with young people. So I think in order to go forward and see to it that we have a better future ahead, it's best to plan ahead. So you just get more young people on board, and that's the easiest way to spread your message across.
That sounds like a great start. And is any of this integrated into the schools? Speaking of young people, and I know schooling, actually, I don't even know. In Lusaka, are schools online? I know there's so many people who are not on the internet. So how is schooling happening?
The last 3 months, we had schools online, but recently schools just opened. So we also go out in local community schools just to engage young kids and adolescents on the program. So right now, according to COVID regulations, a few classes are open, in-person classes. And yeah, it's been going great. It's been going great.
That's great. And let me switch the screen here back to, here we go. So in Puja, again, I was so impressed with that network you had built in a flash that included a guy, I can't remember if he was an accountant, who was
Goldie, yeah.
Goldie. He was
Saluja.
speaking to us while driving food to one of the destinations. Very agile. What I really appreciate about the activities you've been involved in is you're able to transfer the same capacity, the same network building to different tasks,
I can't.
plastics or food,
Yeah.
work. Is there a tip you would have for others?
My tip will be what Mahatma Gandhi actually once said, that you be the change what you want to see in the world. So it is everybody, every individual has to bring that change. And due to the pandemic, we connected to so many people, and through this food distribution network, we made so many connections, and I feel I am connected to the entire city. So whenever now we've started working on livelihood, so they know our work, and now these people are supporting us in our livelihood work also. So I think through all the Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, the connections that we have built are so strong. And now people are really, they want to help us with our livelihood, with our eco mission. And now it's just spiraling into something really big. So I'm really happy about that. And there are so many young people who have come up with their own startups, online startups, and they want to make eco-friendly products, and they have approached us, like 22, 23-year-olds. And it's so glad to connect with these young people, and all of us will grow together, hopefully. Yeah.
That's so great. And I love that, to never leave a network behind. In other words, the connections you make in one
Yes.
context can suit another one as well. That seems so important. Do you, is there well, hold on, let me just see. I want to see if there's one more question here. There's just a lot of positive comments coming in on social media here now. Yeah, well, here's one I think I didn't show before. This is about the costs and the benefits. How does one balance out progress with the environmental costs at which the benefits come? Now, I guess we would say here, well, with plastics, if the alternatives are not more costly, then obviously that isn't an issue. But sometimes, some of the bigger questions with energy can still be a function of cost. Food, I don't know, Kazana, when you think about how you promote the nutrition network there, I assume part of the argument is what I've heard many times. If you want a productive, fully wrought society and workforce going forward, nutrition is a fundamental part of that. So helping spread nutrition to the poorest people is a bargain to society overall, I assume. That would be true anywhere.
Speaking on that, it's been challenging because most of these children that come from low-income communities are the ones that are stunted and the ones that have malnutrition. So it's actually difficult to communicate to the parents to say, I think you're not feeding your child the right food. And the question that comes to play is, what do I have the money? Can I afford a balanced diet for this child?
Right.
So going forward, our plan was to engage farmers in the project so that they can help them with home gardening, so they can grow fruits and vegetables in their backyards, which is very less costly and more efficient. And if the crops and the fruits are going well, it's easier for them to sell the products and to have a little income to feed their families and children. So we're actually working on that plan right now because it hasn't been easy communicating to these parents what's good for their kids and what's not good. And then the other thing is we also help them acknowledge if you can get a balanced diet from a local market. It doesn't have to be from an extravagant mall where you have to say, I'm going to buy potatoes or I'm going to buy broccoli. It's just the simple, cheap, local food from these markets. And it's easier to create a balanced diet from that food. So yeah, it's an issue. It's an issue, but it's part of our plan for the kingdom.
That's wonderful. Maybe we can pursue another conversation in a couple of months to see how that food production part is going, the integration of farming. We're at the end of our hour. It's been wonderful to have you here today, both of you, Khazana and Puja, and to learn about Nutrition 2030, nutrition2030.org in Africa and in Zambia. And Pooja Iyengar, you're doing great work there on the ground. Can you just say the name of your nonprofit group that works with women?
It's Mahashakti Seva Kendra.
And what does that translate to in English?
Mahashakti is the goddess Durga, and she embodies like power, and Seva is work, and Kendra is center.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you both for being here tonight, in the case of Puja, and this evening, in the case of Khazana in Lusaka. And of course, today we had Shia Bastida from New York City, who is attending the University of Pennsylvania and is a remarkable Fridays for Future leader. Just a closing comment here. Sustain What is a global online conversation identifying solutions to the complicated, shape-shifting, and epic challenges of humanity's great acceleration. These last 60 years or so, we've been surging, and now the virus has forced us into pause mode, the great pause, as some call it. And we have this enormous challenge going forward, with or without the pandemic, getting people progress toward sustainability goals and climate goals. The webcast is produced as part of my work building Columbia University's new ReEarth Institute initiative on communication and sustainability. Our daily question is, how do you make information matter in this crazy new online environment we have for sharing and shaping ideas? It's pretty broken right now, but there's paths forward, as we heard today. As soon as we're done, share the link you're watching on with friends in circles far and wide. These get archived right away. Get in touch with me with ideas. Look at the scrolling bar at the bottom of the screen. And thank you again for being here. And to all my guests, particularly Khazana, Puja, and Shia, back in class. Stay safe, stay connected for sure. I love the connections you're building, and be well.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Thank you.